We're going to start off with the SNES CD-ROM. Ken Kutaragi, a Sony engineer, was inspired by video games after watching his daughter play on the Famicom video game console from Nintendo. He worked on a contract at Sony to create hardware that would power the sound system of Nintendo's upcoming console, the Super NES. Kutaragi secretly made the chip the Sony SPC 700. Sony did not care about the video game business at all, so most of his bosses did not like the project, but Kutaragi got the support from Sony executive Norio Oga, and the project went on. The project was successful, and Ken Kutaragi, who thought CD-ROMs would replace cartridges eventually, suggested the CD-ROM drive for the Super Nintendo. Nintendo did not agree, thinking that CD-ROMs were too slow, but they let Sony make the add-on after Kutaragi said the drive would only be used for everything except for games. The deal would result in the CD-ROM add-on for the Super NES, and Sony-branded console that would play both SNES cartridges and games made for the new Super Disc format called the PlayStation. Sony and Nintendo signed the contract to start making the format in late 1988. The system would work with SNES games and games made for the Super Disc format. According to their agreement, Sony would make and control the Super Disc format, and Nintendo would give up a lot of control of software licensing to Sony. Also, Sony would be the only one to benefit from licensing related to music and movie software that it wanted as another use case. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi did not trust Sony at this point and did not like it because Sony was the only one who made the audio chip, the SSMP, used in the SNES, and developers had to pay for a costly development tool from Sony. Sony had plans for a PlayStation hybrid console, and they had been growing fast from their electronics roots into music, movies, and software. Nintendo was suspicious of Sony's growth and thought they were using them for their future console plans. Also, Yamauchi began to prefer Philips, one of Sony's biggest rivals. To stop the agreement, Yamauchi sent Nintendo of America president Minoru Arakawa and executive Howard Lincoln to the Netherlands to make a better deal with Philips. David Sheff wrote in his book Game Over that the Philips deal was supposed to do two things at the same time: give Nintendo back its power over software and screw Sony nicely. At the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in June 1991, Sony showed its cartridge CD console that worked with SNES games, the PlayStation. The next day, Nintendo showed its partnership with Philips at the show, a shock to everyone, including Sony. Even decades later, it seems like the same Nintendo back then that we have now. While Sony and Nintendo tried to fix their problems, between 200 and 300 prototypes of the PlayStation were made, and software for the system was being made. In 1992, they made a deal that let Sony make the hardware that worked for the SNES games, but Nintendo kept control and profit over the games. The group never fixed their problems, but for a while, Sony executives still thought that working with Nintendo was the better idea. By the next year, following Kutaragi's ideas, Sony stopped working on the Super NES CD-ROM to make its own console for the next generation, the PlayStation.
$2.99.
On March 6, 2020, there was an auction for a prototype of the console. The winning bid was $300,000, and the winning bidder was Greg McLemore, who founded Toys.com and Pets.com, and actually had a mighty impressive game collection himself. The second highest bidder was Oculus founder Palmer Luckey. This is how the console was described at the event. At one time, this particular unit was owned by the founder, first president, and first executive officer of Sony Computer Entertainment, Olaf Olofsson. Olaf eventually left Sony to join Advanta Corporation and became its president in 1998. A little over a year later, Olaf left Advanta to join Time Warner, but he left his Nintendo PlayStation prototype behind at Advanta. Roughly around this time, Advanta filed for bankruptcy and began gathering up everything in their corporate offices to sell at auction. As the story goes, the Nintendo PlayStation prototype was grouped together with some miscellaneous items that were boxed up with the group lot, and the contents of which were veiled. A nice Easter egg for the winning bidder, indeed. There is said to be 199 more prototypes of the system out there unaccounted for. I hope one day they are discovered and that I will be able to have one for myself. The second console we're going to talk about is the NET Yaroze. Sony Computer Entertainment launched a promotion for computer programming enthusiasts in June 1996 in Japan and in 1997 in other countries. It was called the NET Yaroze, which means let's do it together. The PlayStation creator Ken Kutaragi came up with this idea, and it cost around $750 US. The NET Yaroze package included a special black-colored PlayStation unit for debugging, a serial cable for connecting the console to a personal computer, and a CD with PlayStation development tools to write the code, compile it, and send the program to the PlayStation. The official PlayStation software developers kit had many features that the NET Yaroze did not have, such as special software, certain libraries, advanced hardware debugging, BBS, and live telephone support from Sony. Sony also maintained Usenet groups for the NET Yaroze members only. They also provided homepage hosting. The access to these groups and the hosting was based on the kit's region of origin, which made it hard for users in different regions to work together. The Yaroze had the same primary RAM as the consumer model, which was 2 megabytes. The NET Yaroze could not play CDs burned by the users, which was necessary to stop piracy and make sure that the Yaroze program would not compete with PlayStation's professional software development kit. Because of this, game code, graphics, audio samples, and runtime libraries had to fit in the 2 megabytes of primary RAM, 1 megabyte of VRAM, and 0.5 megabytes of sound RAM. And finally, we have our 10 million sold PS1. This is a top 10 rare PlayStation console of all time, as there are only 300 of them, 100 for Japan, 100 for PAL, and 100 for NTSC. It is hard to know the details on the system's history. I've looked it up. I can't seem to find much on it. All I do know is that they were prizes for some form of contest. Specifics are not really available, but I love the blue very much. You will see a common theme with all of my videos coming up, that the blue consoles made by PlayStation are typically my favorite overall. Thank you for taking time out of your day to check out my video. If you would like and subscribe to my channel, that would be greatly appreciated. If you like PlayStation content or gaming history in general, it would be much appreciated. This is my first video, so I'm sorry if it's a little bit rough, but it's going to be a learning experience for me, and I'm excited to take you on the journey with me. Thank you very much for your time.